The biggest lie in the revolver versus semi-auto debate is that 357 Magnum and 45 ACP play in the same league. They do not. One of these cartridges is doing real work in 2026. The other is being kept on life support by nostalgia, internet forums, and the same gun store employees who told your dad to buy a snub-nose 38 in 1987. Useless is a strong word. It is the right word for one of these two rounds in the role most carriers think they are buying them for. By the end of this video, you will know which one and you will know exactly why. Not which caliber is more powerful. Which one earns the right to be on your hip, in your nightstand, or in your truck console in 2026 with the gun you actually have access to. The platform problem nobody wants to discuss. The 357 Magnum was designed in 1934 for revolvers. That is not a historical footnote. That is the core limitation of the cartridge in 2026. A modern carry class 357 Magnum revolver holds 5, 6, or 7 rounds depending on cylinder size. Reload time under stress is measured in seconds, not fractions of seconds. A speed loader is not a magazine. A J-frame snub-nose with a 1.875-inch barrel holds 5 rounds. After those 5 rounds, you are reloading slower than someone with practice on a semi-auto can clear and reload twice. A modern carry class 45 ACP pistol holds 7, 8, 10, 13, or 15 rounds depending on the platform. The Glock 21 holds 13. The Wilson Combat EDCX9 and 45A CP configuration holds 10. Magazine changes happen in well under 2 seconds with any baseline of training. The capacity gap is not a marketing argument. It is documented in every defensive and counter analysis published in the last 15 years. The average defensive incident involves between 2 and 5 rounds fired by the defender. Most incidents are resolved with fewer than 5 rounds, but the operative word is most. The cases where more rounds were needed are documented, and they include scenarios where multiple attackers were involved, body armor was present, or the first shots missed under genuine stress. In a 5-round revolver, you do not have a margin for any of those scenarios. In a 13-round 45 ACP, you have margin for all of them. This is the first reason one of these cartridges is closer to useless than the other in 2026. It is not which one yet. The barrel length penalty. 357. Magnum exists because of pressure. SAMI maximum pressure for 357 Magnum is 35,000 pounds per square inch. That pressure produces the velocity that gives the cartridge its terminal performance reputation. The standard 158 grain 357 Magnum load from a 4-inch barrel runs approximately 1,250 feet per second. The problem is what happens when you put that same cartridge into the barrel. Most people actually carry it in. A snub-nose 357 Magnum with a 1.875-inch barrel does not produce 1,250 feet per second. Independent chronograph testing published by Ballistics by the Inch and confirmed in multiple modern firearms publications shows the same 158 grain load exits a snub-nose barrel at approximately 950 to 1,050 feet per second. That is a 200 to 300 feet per second velocity loss from the same round. At 950 feet per second, the 357 Magnum is producing terminal ballistics roughly equivalent to a hot 38 Special Plus P load. You're carrying a cartridge that costs more, generates dramatically more recoil, produces a fireball every time it fires, and delivers performance that is only marginally better than the cheaper round it was designed to replace. The 45 ACP does not have this problem to the same degree. The cartridge operates at 21,000 pounds per square inch and uses a faster burning powder profile that completes most of its combustion within the first 2 to 3 inches of barrel travel. A 230 grain 45 ACP load from a 3-inch barrel exits at approximately 830 feet per second. From a 5-inch barrel, the same load exits at approximately 870 feet per second. That is a 40 feet per second loss across more than double the barrel reduction. .45 ACP was engineered to work in shorter barrels. The .357 Magnum was engineered to work in longer ones. In 2026, most people are not carrying long barrels. The recoil and muzzle flash reality. A .357 Magnum fired from a snub-nose revolver in low light is one of the most violent handgun experiences in defensive ammunition. The muzzle flash is large enough to destroy your night vision for several seconds. The recoil impulse through a small frame revolver grip is sharp enough that follow-up shots from a J-frame .357 are measurably slower than follow-up shots from the same revolver loaded with .38 Special. This is not my opinion. This is documented in multiple defensive training programs that have stopped recommending .357 Magnum as a carry load, specifically because of the follow-up shot penalty. The .45 ACP fired from a full-size or compact pistol produces a rolling push that experienced shooters describe as easier to manage than 9mm at the same pressure due to the lower chamber pressure and the heavier slide reciprocating against a heavier projectile. Muzzle flash from .45 ACP is dramatically less than .357 Magnum because the cartridge operates at 40% lower pressure and uses less propellant overall. In a home defense scenario where shots are likely to be fired in low light with no ear protection, the difference between these two cartridges is the difference between a controlled defensive response and a sensory overload that takes 10 to 15 seconds to recover from. If your attacker is still moving during those 10 to 15 seconds, you have a problem with the cartridge created for you. The penetration problem. Every defensive shooting that goes to court eventually involves an analysis of overpenetration. Where did the round go after it left the target? What did it hit? Was the defender's choice of ammunition reasonable under the circumstances? The .357 Magnum, particularly in 125 grain and 158 grain hollow point configurations, is the single most documented over-penetrating handgun cartridge in defensive use. FBI ballistic protocols list .357 Magnum from a 4-inch barrel as routinely exceeding 18 inches of penetration in calibrated ballistic gel. The FBI penetration window for defensive ammunition is 12 to 18 inches. .357 Magnum frequently exceeds the upper limit. In a home defense context, that over-penetration becomes a wall, a door, a neighbor, or a family member behind the target. Every round you fire that does not stop in the threat becomes a liability the moment it leaves the threat. .45 ACP in standard 230 grain hollow point configurations penetrates 12 to 15 inches in calibrated gel through standard FBI testing protocols, right in the center of the recommended window. Over-penetration through standard interior walls is documented but significantly less than .357 Magnum from comparable platforms. For carriers and home defenders who actually think about what happens behind the target, this is one of the most ignored differences between these two cartridges. .45 ACP stops where it is supposed to stop. .357 Magnum frequently does not. The practice cost reality. Bulk .45 ACP FMJ from Blazer Brass, Federal American Eagle, and MagTech runs 32 to 45 cents per round in 2026. Not cheap, but accessible. Bulk .357 Magnum FMJ does not exist in the same way. Most .357 Magnum is loaded as defensive ammunition at premium prices. Cheapest .357 Magnum FMJ runs 70 cents to $1 per round. Defensive .357 Magnum runs $1 and 20 cents to $2.50 per round. The shooter who practices with 200 rounds of .45 ACP per month is spending $64 to $90 per session. The shooter who tries to practice with 200 rounds of .357 Magnum per month is spending $140 to $200 per session. That is a difference of $76 to $110 every range trip. The practical result is documented across thousands of carriers. 357 Magnum owners shoot 38 Special at the range, and 357 Magnum only occasionally because the cost and recoil punishment of practicing with the actual carry load is too high. .45 ACP owners shoot .45 ACP at the range because the practice load and the carry load are functionally similar. Trigger time wins gunfights. The cartridge you can afford to practice with is the cartridge you will actually be proficient with under stress. The Suppressor and modern setup reality. In 2026, home defense increasingly includes suppressor consideration. The legal landscape has shifted significantly since the 2024 ATF rulings on suppressor ownership and registration timelines. 45 ACP is the cleanest suppressor host cartridge in defensive use. Every standard 45 ACP load is subsonic. Add a suppressor and the cartridge runs quieter without any ammunition substitution required. 357 Magnum cannot be suppressed effectively in a revolver. The cylinder gap releases gas at every shot regardless of what is mounted on the barrel. There is no production suppressor that closes the cylinder gap on a standard revolver. A 357 Magnum revolver with a suppressor still produces the same supersonic crack and roughly 90% of the unsuppressed sound signature. For home defense in 2026, this is not a marginal difference. This is a fundamental platform limitation that 357 Magnum cannot solve because of the mechanical design of the revolver itself. Which one is useless? 357. Magnum is the cartridge being kept on life support by nostalgia. It costs more to practice with. It overpenetrates more in the context most carriers actually face. It produces more muzzle flash and slower follow-up shots from the platforms most people actually carry. It cannot be suppressed in its native platform. It loses 25% of its velocity from the barrel lengths most carriers use. And it does all of this while delivering 5 to 7 rounds before requiring a reload that takes longer than a magazine change on a semi-auto. 45 ACP earns its place in 2026 on documented mechanical advantages. Subsonic across the entire factory loading range. Penetration that stays in the FBI window. Capacity that ranges from 7 to 15 depending on platform selection. Suppressor compatibility without ammunition modification. Lower chamber pressure that extends firearm service life. Recoil characters that experienced shooters consistently report as more controllable through the platforms it is actually carried in. The 357 Magnum is not useless in every context. It remains a legitimate hunting cartridge for medium game. It remains a legitimate trail gun for animal defense. It remains a historically important cartridge that deserves respect for its place in American firearms history. But in 2026, in the role most carriers think they are buying it for, which is concealed defensive carry or home defense, the 357 Magnum has been thoroughly outperformed by cartridges that did not exist or were not widely available when it was designed. If you are choosing between 357 Magnum and 45 ACP for defensive carry or home defense in 2026, the 45 ACP wins on every metric that actually matters in the role. These two cartridges are not the same, and one of them is not what people think it is. The 357 Magnum is a cartridge whose reputation was built in conditions that do not match how most people carry, shoot, or defend themselves in 2026. 45 ACP is a cartridge that was engineered for the platforms and contexts that dominate modern defensive use. If you carry a 357 Magnum because you love the platform, because you trained on it, because it suits your hand and your purpose, none of this changes that. A cartridge you have trained extensively with and trust is always better than a cartridge you have not. But if you are buying a defensive handgun in 2026 and someone is recommending 357 Magnum as the answer, ask them what barrel length they tested it in, what their last range round count was on the cartridge specifically, and whether they have considered over-penetration through interior walls. Most people recommending 357 Magnum in 2026 cannot answer those questions honestly. Test the cartridge you carry through the gun you actually own at the distances you might actually use it. Not on a forum, at the range. With a chronograph and a clean target and a witness, a cartridge you have never tested is not a defensive tool. It is a belief system. Buy the round that matches your platform, your training, and your real-world environment. Test it until you know exactly what it does and exactly what it does not do. Then get off the forums and put rounds downrange. If this gives you something to verify rather than something to argue about, there is more on this channel every single week.